Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Be sure to check out Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks. TCG Player for cards at great prices while supporting local game stores. And Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. Our patron Charles is back for another game. He brought a new take on an interesting commander. Each player brought a deck, and by sheer accident, this ended up being a table with no blue. So we will see how it does tonight. Did you know we've started a podcast? The Playing with Power podcast is available on YouTube and all major streaming platforms. We interview guests and talk about topics in the CEDH space. Check it out on your favorite podcast service today. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Noah piloting the Gitrog monster. This is a proactive deck seeking to cast its commander and go infinite through its complicated discard line that's quite frankly not really worth explaining here. Noah's opening hand contains an Overgrown Tomb, Forbidden Orchard, Wooded Foothills, Crop Rotation, Deathrite Shaman, Finehorn Elves, and a Gitrog Tree Speaker. Next, we have Charles piloting Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. At first glance, this deck would appear to be a combo deck, but Charles actually built this deck as a Death and Taxes style build. It seeks to slow down the board, accrue advantage through its commander, and then win with one of its combos. Charles' opening hand contains a Homeward Path, Weathered Wayfarer, Conqueror's Flail, Mentor of the Meek, Scrapyard Recombiner, and 2 Snow-Covered Plains. After that, we have Mike piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Jeska, Thrice Reborn. This is a turbo ad nauseum deck called Mad Farm. It seeks to resolve an ad nauseum, create an infinite combo, and win the game. Mike's opening hand contains a Grand Abolisher, Talisman of Conviction, Overeager Apprentice, Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent, Gamble, and a Verdant Catacombs. Finally, we have Ryan piloting Anje Falkenrath. This is a proactive deck that seeks to filter a lot of madness cards through its commander to find and assemble one of its infinite combos to win the game. Ryan's opening hand contains a Cabal Pit, Wooded Foothills, Biting Rain, Insatiable Gorgers, Psychotic Episode, Animate Dead, and his London Mulligan is an Imp's Mischief. Without further ado, let's begin this tantalizing, tenacious telling of traumatic truths. Noah was able to stay on fire the longest and gets to start us off. Noah draws a card for turn and plays a Forbidden Orchard. He taps his Orchard, giving Ryan a Spirit to cast Birds of Paradise. Noah passes. Charles draws a card for turn and plays a Snow-Covered Plains. He casts a Weathered Wayfarer and ends his turn. Mike draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts Gamble. He fetches up a card into his hand and then discards a card at random, which is a Grand Abolisher. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Talisman of Conviction. Mike passes the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He passes. Noah draws and plays an Overgrown Tomb into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Gitrog Tree Speaker. He casts a Deathrite Shaman. He taps his Forbidden Orchard, giving Charles a Spirit to cast Finehorn Elves. With his Mana Dork tribal board state all set up, Noah passes the turn. Charles draws and starts off his turn by activating Weathered Wayfarer. He fetches up an Urza Saga into his hand. He plays Urza Saga for turn. It enters and gets its first counter. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Lion's Eye Diamond. He casts a Conqueror's Flail. With a good turn 2 in the books, Charles ends his turn. During his upkeep, Mike casts Vampiric Tutor. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Also in his upkeep, he loses his Mana Crypt trigger and takes 3 damage. He draws and then taps his Talisman to help cast Dockside Extortionist. It enters and Mike creates 4 treasures. He casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing his Dockside Extortionist. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Reanimate, targeting Dockside. It resolves, Dockside enters, Mike loses 2 life, and then he creates 4 more treasures. He casts a Demonic Tutor. He fetches up another card into his hand. He casts Necropotence. He pays 16 life into Necro, exiling 16 cards. He moves to his end step, putting the Necro cards into his hand. In his end step, Ryan cracks his Wooded Foothills, pays a life, and fetches up a Blood Crypt onto the battlefield tapped. Then Mike discards the hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Ryan draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He casts a Soul Ring. Ryan passes. Noah draws and starts off his turn by leveling up Gitrog Tree Speaker 1 time. He activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling a land from Mike's graveyard. He then taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Ryan a Spirit to help cast his commander, the Gitrog monster. He plays a Wooded Foothills for turn. He cracks it, paying a life. Gitrog triggers and Noah draws. He fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Forbidden Orchard. Gitrog triggers and Noah draws. He fetches up a Bazaar of Baghdad onto the battlefield. He activates Bazaar, drawing 2 cards and discarding Jeweled Lotus, Twilight Mire, and a Mana Confluence. Gitrog triggers, and Noah draws. With nothing else, Noah passes. Charles draws, and in his first main phase, Urza Saga gets another counter. He activates Weathered Wayfarer and fetches up an Ancient Tomb into his hand. He plays the Snow-Covered Plains. He casts his commander, Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. All through, Charles ends his turn. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He casts Jeska's Will, targeting Charles. In response, Charles cracks his Lion's Eye Diamond, discarding his hand and adding 3 white. Everyone is completely awestruck at the bold play by Charles. Mike sighs, Jeska's Will resolves, and Mike adds 0 mana. He plays a Plateau for turn. He casts a Memnite. He casts a Lotus Petal. He casts a Wishclaw Talisman. He activates Necropotence 5 times, paying 5 life and exiling 5 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. Ryan draws and plays a Cabal Pit. He casts his commander, Anja Falkenrath. He activates Anja, discarding Ecorse Lick, untapping Anja and drawing a card. He activates Anja, discarding Psychotic Episode, Biting Rain, Twins of Mauer Estate, Insatiable Gorgers, untapping Anja each time and drawing a card. He activates Anja, discarding Blazing Root Walla, untapping Anja. He casts Blazing Root Walla. It resolves, and then Ryan draws through Anja. Finished up, Ryan passes. During his upkeep, Noah's Gitrog triggers. He floats a black through Overgrown Tomb and sacrifices it to Gitrog. Gitrog triggers, and in response, Noah casts Vampiric Tutor. In response, Mike casts Silence. Noah sighs, Silence resolves, then Vampiric Tutor resolves. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Then Gitrog's trigger resolves, and Noah draws. Noah draws for turn and moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Gitrog. Mike blocks with Memnite. In his second main phase, he activates Bazaar, drawing 2 cards and discarding Dismember, Finale of Devastation, and Wild Growth. He plays a Prismatic Vista for turn. He cracks it, paying a life. Gitrog triggers, and Noah draws. He fetches up a Swamp onto the battlefield. With nothing else, and locked out through Silence, Noah passes to Charles. Charles draws, and in his first main phase, Urza Saga's trigger goes onto the stack. Charles then floats mana, and then sacrifices it to its ability. He fetches up the best card you could ever fetch up with Urza Saga, Origin Spellbomb. Charles activates Weathered Wayfarer, fetching up an Inventor's Fair into his hand. He plays Inventor's Fair for turn. He sacrifices his Origin Spellbomb. He pays a white and draws a card. He creates a Mirror. He casts Lightning Greaves. Teshar triggers, and Charles targets Scrapyard Recombiner in his graveyard, which everyone knows is a combo piece. In response, Noah activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling Scrapyard Recombiner from Charles's graveyard and gaining 2 life. Teshar's ability fizzles, and Lightning Greaves resolves. He equips Greaves onto Teshar. He attacks Mike with Teshar. Mike takes it, and Charles passes the turn. During his upkeep, Mike loses his Mana Crypt trigger and takes 3 damage. He skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He casts a Mana Vault. He activates his Wishclaw Talisman, fetching up a card into his hand and giving it to Charles. He plays a Godless Shrine into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Peer into the Abyss. It resolves, Mike draws 31 cards and loses 1 life. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding Cavern of Souls. He casts a Mox Opal. He casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting Ad Nauseam, which seems pretty fitting right now. He casts Calling the Weak, sacrificing his Dockside Extortionist, making 4 black. He casts Cabal Ritual with Threshold, making 5 additional black. He casts Dark Ritual, adding yet 3 more black. He casts Animate Dead, targeting Dockside. Dockside re-enters, and Mike creates 6 treasures. He casts Savine's Reclamation, targeting his Grand Abolisher. It resolves, and Grand Abolisher enters. Now feeling safe, Mike casts Underworld Breach. He escapes 3 and casts Demonic Tutor from his graveyard. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Cloudstone Curio. He casts Hope of Girapur. He exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand for a red. He casts Loyal Apprentice. Cloudstone Curio triggers, and Mike returns Dockside Extortionist to his hand. He presents a loop of casting Dockside, making treasures, bouncing Apprentice with Curio, and recasting Apprentice with some treasures, bouncing Dockside. With this loop, he can make infinite mana. He casts his commander, Jeska, Thrice Reborn. He activates Jeska's second ability, dealing 1 damage to each opponent. Jeska dies and goes back to the command zone. He then presents a loop of recasting Jeska and dealing more and more damage to each opponent until the table is dead. Ladies and gentlemen, what a cool game. This game had no blue at the table, and the speed was definitely felt as a result. Congrats to Mike on his win. He was able to recover after Charles' bold attempt to stop his value when he cracked his LED. Mike got a ton of value off of both Dockside and Necropotence and gave him the engines needed to close out the game. The most valuable card in tonight's game goes to Necropotence. While Dockside Extortionist was up for consideration in this game, it was Necropotence that kept Mike's hand full. Mike repeatedly kept dumping his hand out each turn and was able to refill over and over. Mad Farm sacrifices quality for speed, and Necropotence ensured Mike had enough resources to be able to do what he needed to win. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Alright, Patreon shoutout time. I'd like to give a shout out to Alana Kexes, Salt, Jonas Kofoed, Ryan Wright, Kvitborn Kong Valamon. Ooh, that's brutal. Sorry about that. Natalia Rubinovitz, Ivan, Thumerian Descendant, Frapril, Connor Holtz, Nathan Smith, Elijah Miller, Pyro, Dark, Mr. Doc Profoliol McSwaggy Pants the Third. Oh boy. Philip Hickey, Jacob Cromer, Brad Tobin, Matt Wingrove, Delph Driz, Dante, Jared Smith, Trey Payne, Rakeko, Zods, James Cody Halley, Spielrahu, CZ, Taylor Corun, Nick, and Liam. Thank you all very much for your support.